Well, hello everyone. Welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter, and no, I don't care what Titan says. It is 9 p.m. We started exactly on time. I am aware that that concerns a number of you, and I myself am a little surprised. But here we are, literally starting on time. I have with me today Commander Lance McMillan and 𝐒𝐨𝐻𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿. Commander 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿, how are you gentlemen doing?
Pretty good.
I see all of my hard work has paid off in getting you to and this whole channel to start on time as well as we're being in time. I am claiming 100% responsibility, even though I have not done a damn thing.
It's probably only going to happen once. I'm surprised. I think it's like and lo, he opened the seventh seal, and in time was on time. I was going to throw in some other
end times.
Oh, so thank you all for joining us. It's been a while since we've had like something that wasn't a downtime stream, so I'm glad that we could do it. This issue we've been banting it back and forth on the Discord and trying to sort it out, and it's one hell of a mess. Since the attack that started what we're calling the war on Gaza, that attack was I want to say October 7th. Yeah, October 7th, and killed an estimated 1,139 people, and in some of the most it was one of the most brutal attacks I think that we've seen in a very, very long time. The war, the subsequent war, has killed an estimated 40,000 Palestinians and an estimated 1,400 Israelis, which is quite a disparity. So what I thought we could do is talk a little bit about what the interests are involved, why it's so hard to untangle, and also see some of the footage of it. In fact, why don't I just switch over right now, and you guys can take a look. Now, we know that there was 300,000 or 350,000 on the first night, 700,000 on the second night, and we don't know how many there are now. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. Now, I did ask, and well, actually, before I get into that, one other thing. We have demonetized this show, and there's a very specific reason why. We'll get into that a little later. But super chats are always welcome, and would really appreciate that. We have a clip that may draw a strike, and we do not want to be demonetized for that because we do not support the channel that we are clipping from. So we have demonetized the show. So again, we'll get into that. I did ask Lance in one of my more manic modes, I guess, to condense the history of Israel into 15 minutes. This is true. I did ask him to do that. So go.
You didn't tell me you were going to ask about that tonight, because those notes are upstairs.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I'll summarize, and we'll actually do a show on that because it's fascinating stuff.
It is, but I think I remember talking to you about it, and you're like, Nick, it really goes a long way back. And I know it goes. I mean, I'm educated. I know it goes a long way back, but I didn't. I was like, you don't have to go all the way back to the Old Testament, do you? And he goes,
no,
yeah,
I have no
you really
intention.
do.
If we're going to talk Israel, I'm only interested in talking modern Israel.
That's all. I completely agree.
Right,
and I think you
because if you start getting into ancient Israel, then you get all this other, is it real? Is it Memorex? Is it myth, legend, what have you? I'm not going to make those debates. That's outside my purview. What I will say is that when you start looking at the modern Israel, it's really a relatively recent development. It's only just slightly more than 100 years old. It starts just before World War I, any serious discussion about an Israeli homeland. And it starts in England and then it kind of spreads elsewhere. And there are very different opinions on what that modern Israeli state should look like. And I'm not talking about, between the British, who had the mandate over Palestine after World War I and so forth. I'm talking about amongst the Jewish diaspora of what that modern Israel should look like. And I think that kind of disagreement on what it should look like, we're seeing play out right now in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It's the lack of a real consensus among the Israeli citizens of what they want their country to be and what it represents.
So, and I think that's we're definitely going to segue into that later. That's going to get into the clip that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So, let's then start with I think everything that's happening now was going to happen at some point or another, but because that divide does exist, it's existed for some time. But I think it's Benjamin Netanyahu who, one way or another, is what this is about right now. So could you explain that for the audience a bit, please?
Sure. So Netanyahu is the head of the Likud coalition that currently governs Israel. His party does not enjoy an outright majority, so he has to partner up with a bunch of other smaller parties. And Israel has, I don't know, when you add it all up, there's something like a dozen or more different parties of substance. The issue is that the people he has brought into his coalition are the right-wing and extreme right-wing elements of Israeli politics. And that portion, which I alluded to with this disagreement between the various factions in Israel, that portion is that group of people who view this concept of greater Israel, which should own everything in that region. If a Jew walked on it in ancient times when Moses was around, that's Israel. Everybody else, get the hell out. And that's where you get all these, the settlements that are going in, which are actually against Israeli law, that are being built in occupied territories. And the government, because it is composed primarily from these factions, aren't going to do anything about it because those are their constituents. So that's part of what's going on. Now, the genesis of this current set of protests, and I'm not referring to the ones that occurred over a year ago, where roughly 1,100,000 people were in the streets. The genesis here is that 3 days ago, Hamas executed 6 of the hostages, and they're currently estimated to be roughly 100 hostages still being held by Hamas, presumably somewhere in Gaza. And once that happened, the protests basically said the blame here is Netanyahu's, because there have been a number of tentative deals that have been arranged to release the hostages, and Netanyahu and his coalition have found excuses to deny every single one of those proposed deals, because the argument is it suits their political purposes to keep the crisis going the way it is. And there's some truth to that, because Netanyahu and a number of the people in his government are currently under indictment for a number of fraud and racketeering type charges and, suppression of rights stuff. And as long as he is prime minister, he can't be prosecuted. And in fact, that protest we talked about that occurred over a year ago, that was because he was trying to change the judicial system so that they would agree to his proposed changes to the Constitution, which would make him invulnerable for life to being prosecuted. So a lot of what's really going on here has as much to do with domestic Israeli politics as it does with what's going on inside Gaza.
So this small, before actually I get into that, so Jesus, it's hard to know where to jump into this. This small right-wing, very right-wing faction has essentially kind of hijacked the government, because the reality is, if Netanyahu does not appease them, they've made it clear that they will bail, and he is out.
They've made eminently clear publicly many times that if he doesn't meet their demands, they're pulling out of the coalition. And the moment that happens, no confidence vote, he loses the prime ministership, he goes to jail.
All right. That does seem like an incentive to keep the war going. The U.S. president was
just a tiny.
The U.S. president was asked if Israel's prime minister was doing enough to secure a deal. He answered simply no, which, believe it or not, is still. I mean, it's clear that the U.S. is not happy with what's going on, and we'll get into that in a minute. But Netanyahu, meanwhile, as a consequence of the killing of the hostages, has vowed to, quote, hurt Hamas in a way Israel hasn't done before. I'm not a military expert, but that does not sound like de-escalation to me.
No. And so, again, because of his coalition, they actually favor the harshest way of dealing with Hamas, with the Palestinians in general, with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, all of these groups. It's borderline and in some cases overt genocide is what they're looking for.
All right. Well, since you mentioned that, what I'm going to do is segue. Yeah, I'm gonna play a clip, and before we play a clip, I'm going to do a couple of quick things. We have demonetized this show because of this clip. In general, usually if there's a copyright claim or whatever, it's only for music that you have to worry. But I do not want the other channel to get any monetization from our channel, so we are demonetized for this. We're demonetized for 50% of our content, which is sort of my way of saying, we always appreciate super chats or other ways to make up for it, because the nature of what we do, we get demonetized. I would also like to briefly talk to YouTube. YouTube, hi there. I've had this conversation with YouTube before, and I would like to say that we are about to play copyrighted content. That content has aired on YouTube. That content is extremely inflammatory. It is being aired under the fair use clause of the Copyright Act. We are airing it for commentary because we believe it has to be commented on, and that it's very important to have discussions about this kind of material. That is why we are airing it, and so I have time-stamped this. What we do sometimes is let YouTube know ahead of time, and then when we get struck, we say, go to this spot on the timestamp. We've done it before. It actually works. So my hope is we're not going to get struck, but and I doubt that these gentlemen actually would strike us, because I think they are proud of what they said. So what are we talking about? There is a podcast. It is called Two Nice Jewish Boys. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, before you air it, I want to point one thing out that needs, I think, to be clarified. these protests aren't necessarily about you're treating the Palestinians unfairly. This is not a end the campaign in Gaza. The main focus of these protests is that they want the hostages released, and to get the hostages released, they have to have some sort of agreement with Hamas. So these people may very well, at least a portion of them, a significant portion of them, may very well be perfectly okay with bombing Gaza into rubble. That you need to understand that's not the kind of protest that we're seeing in this country about the situation with Gaza, which is, we need to treat fairly with the Palestinian people and such. These are focused on a very different issue.
Which is something I've been, again, having a hard time wrapping my head around.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I thought this was going to be an important discussion. So this is from the Two Nice Jewish Boys podcast. The podcast recently became a YouTube channel. I believe this is their second show, aired earlier today. A clip from it. And we'll talk about one or two of the claims that they made in there. But they have also just started a Patreon, and they are out of Israel. They are Israeli, but they do the podcast in English. And so let's hear what these gentlemen aired today.
What we're doing in Gaza. Because in Gaza, maybe there's mass destruction, but there's not massive death.
Or deportation.
Or deportation. Anyway, so when you sit on your high horse, and I'm sure I don't mean to belittle our listeners. We love you guys, but if you're listening to our words and saying, how could they be advocating to massive bombing, indiscriminate bombing? How could they talk about killing children? We're not advocating to target children, but forgive us if we don't give a shit. If everybody there dies. It's just the way we feel. It's just the way Israelis feel.
Yeah.
Because, and this is what that's what the Chulon attack did. I wrote to Sharon, my wife. I was like, it'll be you or me tomorrow, or Daniela or Itai, God forbid.
Yep.
And so I would, if you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. That's just, I think most Israelis
if that's
agree.
The choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, even if it's not like right now.
Yeah, no.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same with the territories.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm.
No choice. No, Sharon is safe at home. God willing, I don't know. I haven't spoken to her in like an hour.
No, I'm saying for the chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would press it right now. Give me that button and press it right now.
There you go.
And I think most Israelis would.
Yeah. Most Jewish Israelis.
They wouldn't post. They wouldn't talk about it like I am.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't post. They wouldn't say I pressed it.
Yeah.
But they would.
They don't have balls of steel like you.
They would, but they would press it, right? Like if they were in a closet alone, they wouldn't even hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
Someone came to them and Hadar said, "No one will know. You press this, all the Palestinians are gone." You'd be like, "Fucking hey, is there another one?"
All right. So again, that aired I on YouTube at least earlier today. So I want to before I ask these two gentlemen for their opinions on that, I would like to point out that the lowest bar that I can possibly set, if you're on the side of killing babies, you're on the wrong fucking side. That's it. I can't get any lower than that. Yes.
As I said to you when you showed this to me, like 15, 20 minutes ago for the first time, I said, I'm reminded of a certain group in Europe in the 1940s that pretty much had the same opinion on solving another problem with an ethnic group.
I believe they thought it was the final solution.
Yeah, I've heard that phrase.
Yeah.
That does kind of ring a bell.
Yeah, I'd have to do a little reading to catch up on it, but
Well, and I personally know somebody who feels the same way, and they're not Jewish, they're not Israeli, they're just kind of I guess I could classify them as a bit of a white right-wing nut job. I mean, they make me cringe to identify with anything due to the right when I hear them espouse, but they're the same way. They're like, look, I've looked very briefly into the history of this region. It has been at war for thousands of years. These ideologies this is his argumentation for this. They've been at war for thousands of years. The ideologies, the belief systems that exist in there cannot coexist. They are diametrically opposed to each other. There's no compromise between these groups that can exist. The only way that you are going to end up with peace in that area is one side needs to be completely eliminated. And so he's like, I don't care about this region of the world. I don't give a shit. I'm tired of my money being spent over there, and just kill them all so that we can move on and actually have a somewhat decent world to live in. And it's incredibly shocking to hear somebody just espouse casually. It's like, hello, Mr. Psychopath. You just said, let's just kill everybody that you don't agree with. That's terrifying, because what happens if that group then decides that, well, you personally have a conflict that is unresolvable and we're just not going to tolerate that anymore? It's a bit frightening. And I guess I can see the psychology of how somebody could get there, or the reasoning somebody could use to try and get there and justify it and not think that they were a horrible human being for proposing that solution. Again, a final solution, dare I say. I can't get there, even though I'm not personally attached to anybody over there. I don't know anybody over there. I've never been over there. That's not my tribe. I care a lot more about what's going on around me here, but that's just the tribal nature of human beings. But I still can't advocate for the mass genocide of an entire population of people and think that that's somehow a good thing to do, or that it will lead to some prosperous nation. I have a feeling that any kind of world that you would create out of mass wanton slaughter like that isn't a world that's going to behave or act in the way you think it's going to.
Yeah.
It is quite shocking to see these two talking like this, and I did watch the rest of the podcast, though I was loath to contribute even a single view to it. I felt I needed the context, and they were actually, Commander, very much in line with what you had said. They said that basically Jews actually had owned all of this land going back to the Old Testament, and that the Palestinians are actually the occupiers and have been occupying, this land illegally since, or since even prior to that time, and that justifies doing anything to defend your home. Now, that's your home according to a 3,000-year-old book, all of whom who wrote it has been dead for longer than, oh dear Lord. But it's a little, it's amazing to see. I know in Germany they take the Holocaust very seriously, and anybody who and they censor speech there if you try to,
A.F. Kaplan just commented something in the chat stream here, which I think is very pertinent here. He says, while he doesn't agree with Two Nice Jewish Boys, it should be pointed out that Hamas speaks the exact same way about Jews in Israel. And that's true. And you can take it out of this scenario and you can talk about it being, Myanmar and the Rohingya people, or the Sudanese and the South Sudanese. It's all these groups where you tend to have a extreme right-wing faction. That's their solution. The problem, is exterminate the other side. The problem here is you've got a right-wing solution being proposed on both sides of the fence. So it's never going to get solved until something happens to change that dynamic.
Is the only thing that can change it at this point, do you think, the removal of Netanyahu? And if so, what's that likely to look like? Would these protests be sufficient, or would we have to see something else?
I think that's a starting point. I mean, I hate, well, I love actually playing historical what-if games. So
yeah. I was going to bust your chops on that if you tried to get away with that.
The moment that popped out of my mouth, I said, no, that's bullshit, Macmillan. But what if Menachem Begin had not been killed? And he's the one who's sitting in the power position right now, making those decisions. Or somebody who's his successor who thought in the terms he did. It was distasteful to him what he had to do, but he understood that that solution was the only realistic solution. And instead, Israeli politics has put the one-wayers in position where they're calling the shots.
I'd like to point out, too, and I don't know, I mean, anyone who watches this show knows that I'm a big fan of Martin Luther King Jr., so I tend to go to the civil rights when I'm thinking about the civil rights movement, when I'm thinking about things like this. And there were plenty of people who said, that you'd never be able to end slavery. Slavery was, for whatever reason, the natural order. And in fact, there has been slavery of some kind, and there still is. So it's not like slavery's been ended by any stretch of the imagination. But there was a way to end it without resorting to genocide. Now, the U.S. is certainly guilty of genocide, and I think there was many ways in which we could have, coexisted with the Native Americans, and that did not happen. Sorry, I lost my own thread there. We know that England has they have restricted arms sales. Now they have 135 licensed articles that they sell to Israel. They have removed 5 of that. No, is it 5? I think more than 5, but it roughly 10% of the weapons that they give to Israel have been restricted. The larger items like F-16s, my understanding is, have been restricted. However, the parts to repair any current ones they have are not. Is that effective at all? And if so, if and when do you think the U.S. is going to start taking stronger measures?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we're not likely to see the West do anything anything significant until after the U.S. elections. And I say that because I doubt that most of the significant European states or other second-tier nations are going to follow America's lead. And in this country, with the election coming up, nobody wants to touch that third rail for fear of alienating Black Jewish voters and all the money that comes with that.
Do you think after the elections, Biden after the elections, actually, Biden is almost bulletproof. I mean, he can do whatever he likes, and Kamala can later denounce him, but still support the policy and just keep it in place. Or, so do you think Biden does anything after the election, or do you think he punts to Kamala? And if so, what does she do?
I suspect she will, I won't say deliver an ultimatum, but let Netanyahu know that we're very upset. And if he doesn't start making some progress in solving this problem, that something significant may result.
That significant, I assume, would be a presumably a substantial reduction in arms sales, or are there other possibilities on the table?
Yeah, that, or, well, part of the problem here is that a significant portion of U.S. aid to Israel, military aid to Israel, comes from the Camp David Accords. And if we stop honoring those by giving them their $1 billion plus a year in aid, they could say, okay, well, we're stepping out of the Accords. We don't need them anymore. And then you go back to the situation of everybody in the Middle East suddenly being a threat to Israel. And then when that happens, we're forced to kind of intervene. There's really no option.
So, okay, I did not know that. So here we are. I'm learning something new. We have a $20 super chat, UTV and Ham, KD9WNV, $20 for support. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate it. It helps a lot. So thank you for that. And we have a new member, Silver Earth. Thank you so much for subscribing. Again, it's a great way to help. And the other thing you can do is just, if you like the show, share the link with somebody that you think is also going to like it, and then you guys have something to talk about, and it helps us out too. But thank you all very much for that. Hamas has, or Al Jazeera has said that Hamas may be reaching the point where they, so there's kind of a double-edged sword here. In principle, it's not a bad policy to never negotiate with hostage takers or terrorists. It only encourages more. Having said that, we do. And, what these protests are about is that he should have negotiated and gotten those terrorists back. So clearly a large number of the Israeli people wish that he had negotiated. 6 hostages are dead, a number more threatened. Now, Hamas is promising to do some really terrible things, including releasing one by one the last requests and last notices of everybody before they killed them, and then killing more hostages. But what Al Jazeera pointed out was that Hamas may be reaching a point where it realizes, okay, taking hostages isn't working, and then goes and finds another way to escalate the situation and try to bring Israel to the negotiating table in some way. So how do you reconcile that? Do you want to negotiate? Should you? Shouldn't you? They've taken hostages, and they may, as bad as things are, they may well make them worse. And certainly this threat to did I read? Yes, I did. I read Netanyahu's threat to do things to them that they've never done before, which strikes me as a thinly veiled nuclear threat. I think it's an empty threat. I think if they have a tactical nuke that they could use, I don't think the U.S. would permit them to deploy it. But
they're not. He's not that stupid.
Yeah.
So, I think when he says that, he's talking about potentially just re-annexing Gaza, or taking the northern third or half and just leveling it, turning it into a wasteland, fencing it off, and saying this is a no man's land. Anyone moving in this area is dead.
So if Hamas does reach the conclusion that this isn't working, they kill the hostages. I assume the protests go up, but still not necessarily to a sufficient point to reach a tipping point where he's out. What does Hamas do then?
I'm going to answer a question that appeared in the chat about a comment I made earlier, and it talks about exactly what we're talking about right now. So one of the things that you can track in terms of numbers recruiting for Hamas is that whenever things are calm and there are some sort of relaxation which allows a limited amount of people to go and get work inside Israel from Gaza and such, recruiting for the more militant political factions starts falling off. And that was happening before the attacks back in October. Plus, Hamas was starting to lose ground with some of the other rival factions that were coming up. And technically, it's still a democracy, and there's still supposed to be elections in Gaza. So if you're worried that you might lose power, and Fatah, which is the moderate faction, is, believe it or not, Fatah might get back into power, or a coalition might put Hamas out, or something like that. You want to find some way to mobilize people against Israel and for you. And what's a good way to do that? You launch a series of very horrific attacks into Israel, knowing full well what the Israelis are going to do in retaliation. And for every bomb those Israelis drop, for every artillery shell that blows up a hospital or what have you, Hamas gets more recruits. So it's in Hamas's interest to some extent to keep this going. The trouble is, I think they kind of underestimated just how long and how severe Israel would continue this. And so they're trying to find a way that still lets them emerge as the victors, so they get the reap the political benefits of winning and get more recruits and so forth, while still being able to stop the hostilities. So that it's one of those standard war termination conundrums, which is both sides need to be so miserable and so frustrated with how things are going that they're willing to make concessions. And for the most part right now, the only side that's really suffering are the Palestinians. If anything, the longer this goes on, the more it benefits Netanyahu. So he has, a direct reason to want it to continue, to want it to exacerbate. Does that make sense?
It does. In fact, it reminds me kind of what you had said when I had you one of your very first shows, and I had naively said, "Isn't this going to be over with Ukraine in 3 months?" And you're like, "No, these are the conditions to terminate a war, and it's basically that each side has to really reach the point where it's more miserable to continue the war than it is to end it and to give up whatever they're going to have to lose to end it." And it's just sort of the sides have to. It made sense the way you put it, but it sounds very similar to what you were talking about in how we're going to see an end in Ukraine.
It was the same situation we faced in Iraq and Afghanistan. For every Predator drone that blew up a truck and killed one guy, we probably created 10 people who hated America and joined the movement against us.
We were making enemies faster than we could kill them. It was.
And so understanding I don't agree with them, but what the two nice Jewish boys, or whatever their nickname is, said, I can understand how you can arrive at that mentality, because you're thinking, oh, we've tried to negotiate, and every time we do, another one of these attacks occurred. Every time we do, more artillery comes across the border from Lebanon, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the only solution is kill them all. I can see how you arrive at that, but I think that's a simplistic and stupid thought process.
Well, it's an easy out. I think we always, our brains are always looking for the easiest out, and the easiest out is to see things in black and white. And if there has ever been, there have probably been one or two black or white days in human history. What was the line from The West Wing? Yeah, there are rare days in human history that are black and white, and they always come with a body count. Titan asked a question, and I'm not sure if he's referring to what I think he's referring to. So his question was, what about the claims that Israel funded Hamas? I'm not sure of what he's referring to, but I do know.
There is some,
yes.
Early on,
Mm-hmm.
there was money given to Hamas by Israel. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was something. And the reason it was done is because at the time, and this is way, way back, we're talking the 1960s, basically. It was done because at the time, Fatah, they were the big threat. They were the terrorists. You know, Yasser Arafat and all those groups. So the idea was, if you funded opposition groups to them, that those groups would be able to draw some of the support away from Arafat and Fatah. Now, the other part of that is, in its initial few years, and I'm only talking like 5 years, Hamas was being advertised, and everybody thought that it was basically an Islamic NGO. It was a non-governmental organization for relief of refugees and such. That's how they were being sold to everybody. And so, again, if you're Israel looking for a way to draw support away and to find a way that doesn't necessarily pose a threat to you, you give some money to this new group. But then as time runs on, you find out that no, they're not at all what they are claiming to be. And then that funding stopped. In fact, my research showed it was like only a single payment, and it's like, you know, 50 grand or something silly like that.
So, Brooks just sent me, thank you for that, article. Let's see. This is now, that's odd. This is from the New York Times. Buying quiet inside the Israeli plan that propped up Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gambled that a strong Hamas, but not too strong, would actually keep the peace and reduce the pressure for a Palestinian state. Just weeks before Hamas launched the deadly October 7th attacks on Israel, the head of Mossad arrived in Doha, Qatar, for a meeting with Qatari officials. For years, the Qatari government had been sending millions of dollars a month into the Gaza Strip that propped up the Hamas government. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel not only tolerated these payments, he encouraged them. Let's see.
It's all news to me.
Yeah, this is the first I've heard of it, but it may be what Titan was referring to, and clearly Brooks, unsurprisingly, knows exactly what this is about. the Israeli government welcomed. Now wait a minute. The Israeli government welcomed this. This is the New York Times, but I think. So first of all, what I'm going to do is check out the live chat and see if this is in fact what. Yes, I would. Thank you. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to have Brooks come in and join us, and he will run us through it. So, yep, let me get that ready.
While you're working on that, one
yes.
Observation that I've had through the 60s, even back into the 50s, through the 80s, even into the 90s, the idea of, here's a group that seems to be getting too much power, or we think has too much power in this area. So here's another group that is opposed to that group. So let's start funding them, because of course we're more concerned about the group that's currently in power. And we always end up making things worse when we do that. It's like, okay, give it 20, 30 years, and now suddenly the group that we were funding, or that was being funded to try and get rid of the other group, they've now come to prominence, and they're like 10 times worse. And
so
we gave them all the money.
You're saying that the Mujahideen who morphed into the Taliban, who then supported Osama bin Laden, was all our creation.
No, couldn't possibly have.
Couldn't possibly
like
be.
that.
No, things don't happen that way.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, how are you? I think I have your camera off, but we can hear you. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm popping the camera on if you want. I'm doing okay. This is one of those really fascinating things, because again, it's a lot of fun stuff about Israel where you read it and you're like, well, this is the New York Times. This is not exactly an anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian. And they did real research into this. This was hardcore. So for a decade, just over a decade, billions of dollars came from Qatar into Gaza. And that's not a thing that you can do. Like, I can't get money into Gaza. If I were to try, it would be stopped because of Israel. Like, that's the way it works. So billions of dollars is crazy. Well, Bibi had Mossad assist, like literally suitcases and trucks and fucking cars going through once a month, twice a month, billions of dollars, not a little bit, billions of dollars. Like it's a stunning level of cash. And he did this because to him, if you kept a destabilized sort of setup in Gaza, because that's what he wanted, it would stop Fatah or these other moderate groups or really local organization from ever happening. And it would allow these groups from the outside who want hardcore destabilization to join Bibi, because they all want the same thing. That's all they want. They all love destabilized Gaza. Gives everyone a good time, because then Gaza, the Hamas and the people outside of it, Hamas also, get to get tons of good money. They get to have lots of friends in Iran and other places. Israel gets to be the position it's at. And at no point does Hamas, in theory, gain enough power. So when you read through the article, it's hardcore. It's hard. It's like, to me, it's insane the level that the New York Times went into this. And people didn't talk about this afterwards. But again, 3 or 4 weeks before October 7th, Mossad was in Qatar and asked by the Qataris, do you want the payments to continue? Which, just think for a second, Qatar is asking Israel, do you want us to keep funding Hamas? That's not saying, are you okay with the payments continuing? It's saying, do you want them to continue? This is, to me, shocking as a thing. It's also, fits in with kind of what we know. The money from Qatar, just to read a little bit from the article, the money from Qatar had humanitarian goals like paying government salaries in Gaza, buying fuel to keep a power plant running. But Israeli intelligence officials now believe the money had a role in the success of the October 7th attacks. Are you surprised they used the money for October 7th? I mean, I can't imagine that any terrorist group has ever used money from Western powers or funneled to them for any nefarious things on any other dates that we now call two numbers as the thing. It's an insane concept, but this is part and parcel again to what McMillan was talking about earlier. The thing at the base is the maintaining of power. That is all that matters at the core of this. There's an ideology to some of this. I believe Biden is primarily ideologically invested in Israel rather than anything else. I think he's just a true believer Zionist. I don't think Bibi is. I think Bibi's very, very practical. He's always talked about being practical. He's always been that guy, and he's moved as he needed to. And he needed to keep the moderate or middling Gazan workforce and people and politicians suppressed. And Hamas would fucking do that happily. Muslim Brotherhood has no problem doing that. They love doing it. It's like, they love that shit. So if he can have a friend do that inside, and they get to have this thing where it's like, look at how bad Hamas is. Oh my God, so terrible. We need more weapons to defend against Hamas. Hey, Hamas, you need more money to attack those weapons? Hey, we need more money to defend against Hamas. Hey, Hamas, you need more money? Like, this is the process. And lo and behold, it's worked beautifully until the explosion where everything went south and went wrong and showed the futility of really what had become a paper tiger, the Israeli military, by having this process take part. And I think it's to me incredibly important to realize, because the money that's been going into Hamas, again, Hamas is still doing things internally. There's still stuff making it through, but there was such a huge amount of money to start with, billions of dollars, according to the New York Times, not a Palestinian rag. Haaretz is quoted as well. Haaretz did a big thing on this. Also, not a pro-Palestinian rag, fairly Israeli, fairly Zionist. It's really wild to read some of the quotes and the setup. And again, the goal for them was the same mentality we had in the Middle East. And I think the lessons can be learned from how that turned out in the same way. The management of savagery, I think, is the term that was used of it. And this idea of finding an equilibrium where if we can have the right kind of shitheads that we can support in the right terrible ways, sure, they're going to do awful things, but it'll keep other shitheads at bay. And it did not work in the end for us. It didn't work in the end for anyone in the Middle East. And I think Gaza is exemplary of this. Sorry for the ramble. It's just
it reminds me too of what we're doing in Saudi Arabia. Please.
Yeah. So you said the money was coming from Qatar, yeah, with Israeli blessing, but is the money
by Israelis often,
right? Is the money actually Israeli money?
No, it's Qatari. It's cash from Qatar, and
there was some speculation going on in the chat stream that no, this was Israeli money, and I don't think so.
But again, this would my question to that would be, if let's just say there was no Qatar supporting it, would we put it past Bibi to do this? Because we know he did at various times, do this. Israel has supported shitheads in the past. They've done this. We've done this. This is a very Western thing when dealing with terrorist groups and things like that. I don't believe this is the case in this case. But again, we're talking about allowing billions of dollars over the course of a decade and a half to pass through. I don't think it matters where the money comes from at that point. If you're literally, the Mossad was bringing the money in, like they were being bag boys for Hamas at points. Like, it's wild shit to read, and it's just like it's insane.
I mean, at that level of funding, it sounds like Hamas probably wouldn't exist in anything close to its current form if it wasn't for that funding.
To just quote, during a 2018 cabinet meeting, Mr. Netanyahu's aides presented a new plan. Every month, the Qatari government would make millions of dollars in cash payments directly to people in Gaza as part of a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. Shin Bet, the country's domestic security service, would monitor the list of recipients to ensure members of Hamas's military wing would not benefit. Despite those assurances, dissent boiled over. Mr. Lieberman, who I believe was defense minister, don't quote me on that, saw the plan as capitulation and resigned in November 2018. He publicly accused Netanyahu of buying short-term peace at the price of serious damage to long-term national stability. During an interview last month in office, Mr. Lieberman said the decision in 2018 directly led to the October 7th attacks. For Netanyahu, there is only one thing that is really important: to be in power at any cost. To stay in power, he preferred to pay for tranquility. Suitcases filled with cash soon began crossing into Gaza. Each month, security officials met Mohammed El Amadi, a Qatari diplomat, at the border between Israel and Jordan. From there, they drove him to Kerem Shalom border crossing and into Gaza. At first, he brought $15 million to distribute, with $100 handed out at designated locations to each family approved. The funds were intended to pay salaries, but one Western diplomat based in Israel until last year said Western governments had long assessed that Hamas was skimming cash from the disbursements. Do I have a shocked face? Do I have a shocked face? Money is fungible.
Say it ain't so.
Money is fungible. I love that they needed a CIA analyst to say that. Anything Hamas didn't have to use out of its own budget freed up money for other things. Naftali Bennett, who was Israel's education minister when the payments began and later became defense minister, was among the members of Netanyahu's government who criticized the payments. He called it protection money. This is insane. Like this is, but again, this is why one of the big bugaboos I have and the big problems I have with the conversation of the way we talk and still do, and it's nothing against anyone here, but to talk about Gaza as though it's not Israel, I think is improper. It is Israel. They don't want to talk about it that way because they don't like it being that way. But they maintain and control that border crossing. If anyone invaded that space and took it over, it would be Israel who would respond militarily. They control that space. There hasn't been an election since Israel allowed it. What do you mean? Israel allowed an election in another sovereign country? No, that's not how that works. That's not a thing. So Israel is doing this to Israelis. They don't want to call them Israelis because they're an apartheid system, in the same way that South Africa didn't consider parts of South Africa in the way they talked about them. You know, the slums where the blacks lived, that's not really South Africa. That's this other thing. They have their own words for it. They're their own people. We don't go there. And that's where we're at. And so to not talk about it in such a way, I think is horrifying. Because of this,
He's dead on target.
Wow.
I resign my position. Brooks gets to take over with all of this.
It's just such a horrifying, it's a blunt thing. We usually don't have, it was one of the things over the last 5 years that has happened more and more. And I can say this because we're oldish people. Everyone I know is probably older than me. Andrew, I think, is about my age. But once upon a time, things weren't blunt. Like just the thing. Usually it was a lot of layers of stuff and propaganda and things happening globally. Oh, what was happening in Sarajevo? I don't even fucking know. Like, let's go into it. But now we have just the blunt thing happening. We have the government bluntly talking about what they're doing. We have an asshole on a podcast literally just saying to just kill everyone and commit genocide. Like, that's new. That's new in my lifetime. That's weird. And I think it's disarming because it makes us go, well, there has to be more to it. And no, we're at bare bottom garbage at this point is all I can figure.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So I've taken the article. It is in the Discord. If you guys, anyone wants to read it, it's in the Middle East section. So it's an article by the New York Times. Thank you very much for educating us on that, Brooks. Delighted to have you back and joining us. So thank you so much for offering to step in. Any other thoughts or comments on anything else that we covered? I saw you.
No, I like hanging out with you guys. I love these conversations because it's people who are interested in these things and care about them and also have a materialist view of the world. And here's how things matter. This is the fun stuff. This is the good combos. Like this is because otherwise it's like, we're going to talk about, 500 years ago, this was true. Who gives a fuck? Like, who gives a fuck? Like, there's no point in discussing it at all. Like Macmillan's spot fucking on. We talk about the situation today and where we're at. And I think it's one of the things I would argue makes us, I would argue, more pro-Israel than Zionists, because the reality is the position that they're putting their people in and their country in is teetering. And at some point when Netanyahu fails, and he will, There's no good end to the story. Then when the defense minister goes with them and the hard right, there's no way that power vacuum fills happily for anybody. And if we don't step in at a nuclear level or shoes on the ground, which I don't believe we would for Israel, I don't believe we would put soldiers on the ground. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. I think at that point, Israel is going to be forced to contend with the realities of the life it's made with its neighbors. And it needs to do better now to make sure that ends well. Just my thoughts.
No, I think you're right.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think, though, that right now, at least, the only neighbor that's really hostile to them would be Syria. Egypt and Jordan are kind of, okay, we accept you. We're not happy, but we accept it. And depends on who is in charge of Lebanon from 1 hour to the next as to what their feeling towards Israel is.
Well, even though I would say the way I would phrase it is that they're not anti-Israeli, but they are very much, all of those states are anti-Israel, the current regime and the military and the way that it's set up, because the reality is they're deeply hostile. They're bombing everyone they're on 4 fronts right now. And which is insane to consider as a thing, that they're attacking in 4 fronts as a country in their size in the position they're in, is militarily confusing, but I think also puts them in a place where I don't believe it would cause, Israel fell apart. Everyone's now going to die. I don't think that this is where we're at. I don't think it's going to be that, but I do think that they need to be aware that a destabilizing moment is coming, and they've got to make do with the world that is around them.
100%.
2 points. One, you talked about how, it's kind of shocking how this is all just blatantly out in the open. You're like, I've never seen this before. Except that if we go back and look at all of these schemes that have been happening, they've been getting shallower and shallower, and they've been getting away with it with no particularly large ramifications or repercussions to the people personally. It does not surprise me that they've gotten more and more blatant about it. Why beat around the bush? Why build all of these layers of insulation? We can just come out and do the thing. We're going to get away with it anyway. So that progression doesn't surprise me very much. Also, would we actually put troops on the ground in there? I'm not as confident as you are that we would not. I think that if the instability of Israel were to get to a point where we're seriously contemplating the collapse of the Israeli government, I think we very well may. I mean, where for the first time in naval history of the Pacific Ocean, U.S. naval history in the Pacific Ocean, there are no aircraft carriers in the Pacific Ocean. They're all deployed. And there's a huge unprecedented, well, I can't say it's unprecedented because 9/11 happened, but levels of deployments in that region are approaching the levels of the end of September. I was over there for that, and the sheer amount of naval power that was in the North Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean was staggering. I mean, we could have wiped out, with just the firepower that they had there, we could have wiped out all of those Middle Eastern countries. So I'm not quite as convinced with the amount of massive.
It would have ended poorly. Yes, we have a lot of ways to do significant damage, and we may to a handful of those countries, but to a large number of them at the same time. We are allied in various ways. We're connected in various ways, and a couple, Iran, for example, are terrifying for us to consider attacking directly. They really are.
I'm not saying that the consequences of doing that wouldn't be disastrous. I'm just saying the capability was there to do it.
You were in awe of the power that was. I think is what you were doing.
American might's incredible. I'm flatly going to agree with you there. We are a horrifying, almost nightmare of power militarily, and we are very focused. But to me, this is where we start running into that. The on the ground thing, we may commit drones to a point. We may have some level of aircraft. I don't even think we would need that. The question would be, how far are the American people going to be willing to go back into the Middle East? And I can tell you, even my more war hockey type friends have no interest in Iraq 2.0 or whatever the fuck this would turn into, because that.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we would be sending troops in to, say, invade Lebanon and take it over, or to. I'm talking about if there's a significant danger of the Israeli government collapsing. Say, I'm suddenly drawing a blank on who the hell's in Lebanon right now launching
Sandring,
rockets.
when you say the Israeli government collapsing, do you mean Netanyahu being forced
Yes.
out? Or do you
yes,
mean Israel itself under direct threat of elimination?
Kind of either or. I don't think it's as likely.
Those are tied, right? It's weird how those are tied together.
Yeah,
yeah, it is.
I kind of think
really
they might
hard
be too.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to pull those apart. So I just think, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be eminently true, but the perception being there, it would not surprise me. We already have military power stationed around Israel as kind of a, hey, we're here. Don't get any ideas of trying to do like a let's wipe out Israel type of thing, because we're right here. You know that we're right. You can clearly see us, right? But if that were to happen, I'm not as confident that we wouldn't actually have our own troops inside of Israel to secure Israel, not necessarily moving outside of Israel, but to protect, moving our own
and
air
this is
defense
where we
systems
get.
in.
This is, for me, the difficulty is I believe that Netanyahu and his cabinet understand how to place pressure to ensure that we would have to help them do awful shit in that region. And that's where the reason, like, I don't think boots on the ground makes sense. And your scenario, I get. So I'm not going to say I wholly disagree. I lean another way, is that I think most of the American military who'd be involved or advising, and this is, again, if it's Trump, we'll have boots on the ground, done, and it'll be horrifying and shit will go wrong. If we end up with Kamala and the Dems, I don't foresee there being the same will to involve ourselves to a point where Israel, it's like I'm the big brother and the kid, my little brother, he just starts beating the shit out of some kid at school, and then he screams when he gets punched back, and so I beat the kid up. Now it's that kind of moment we're having where do we get involved? Because Israel just punch another kid and another and another, and they're doing it a lot. And they're doing it, committing mass genocide, and they're going to be doing it again in the West Bank. Netanyahu, I don't know if you showed the image of Netanyahu showing the map of Israel where there was no West Bank. It was fucking wild to see that. I'll see if I can find it. It was insane. So at that point, we're not talking about like us, making sure that like the palace stays away from being under siege. We're taking part in genocide. And I think there is a line there that is going to be very difficult for people to accept in the same way. Just my thoughts, though. I might be wrong.
No, that's why I love getting a disparate array of opinions to look at things, because then you can see a more clear picture coming up of what might be going on. Because this is so murky in so far as the motivations and the different people that are acting either out of a desire for wealth or power. And I hate getting mired down in this, because it's like I look around and I'm like, I don't see a whole lot of good guys here. Who in the hell are we supposed to actually support?
It's politics. There's no good or bad guys. Like that's the reality. We have good or bad guys sort of when we watch movies, but the reality is, especially politicians and especially at the state level, the best we have is people who are aligned and the ability for us to exert pressure. And that's all politics ultimately is how much pressure can we exert to change things? Otherwise, it doesn't change.
Is this the map that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's him zoomed in on Gaza. If there's a second one where he's zoomed out, there's no West Bank in the larger image. He has Gaza shown, but not the West Bank.
Yes, I see it. I got it. I'll have it in a second.
And it was like, if there is a signal, that's a signal. That is that annexing the West Bank is up next. Trump has promised he would allow it, promised it to his donors. Kamala's already put the kibosh on this. There's a reason that this asshole was not willing to meet with her for very long and flew to go to Mar-a-Lago to see Trump. Like, That
Well,
image right there is a huge signal. It's a huge signal. I don't even know how to think about that. That's insane to me.
I hadn't even noticed. So now I feel like, how do you not notice? But we've got that one's also in the Discord, so anyone who wants to hop in and join on the Discord. All right, I think we've covered a lot. I would like to start wrapping this up, so I'd like to start with you, Commander. Any final thoughts before we go on anything that we've talked about or covered tonight?
I don't think we've seen the end of this. I think it's likely to get worse before it gets better. But I will play the optimist in a situation which I'm not terribly optimistic about and say, hopefully, they will find, they being, the Israeli people, will find a way out of this mess and find a way to get the hostages back and stop the fighting and let the Palestinians figure a way to sort their own mess out.
All right, thank you, Brooks. Is Andrew? Absolutely. If you any thoughts? I was saving you for last because I feel guilty that we haven't paid for your camera, and so I was just like, okay, I'll let him have the last word because really, the camera's like $25 or something. I'm not paying for that. I'm sorry. Anyways, you were saying?
Yeah, it's. Cameras, geez, who would have thunk? Actually, it's not the camera so much; it's the lighting. I'm sitting in my truck. How in the hell am I supposed to light myself where I don't look like a ghoul? I've already got a bad enough image, embracing some fairly right-wing ideas, so I don't need any help looking ghoulish. My fervent hope, and it may just be just a wishful hope, is that we can find some way of negotiating or settling this that doesn't end up with some of the worst of solutions, because there's definitely several solutions out there, and I don't think some of those solutions are particularly palatable. And I personally have been seeing more people, sadly, on the more right side, start inching closer and closer to, again, that final solution of we're just need to get rid of these people entirely, and then we can move on with a better world. So I remain hopeful that something good can come out of this, and I'm not entirely sure what to do about it, which is why I like hearing other opinions about what's going on, because I am not an expert in Middle Eastern politics or history, and it just comes across as a colossal mess, and I'm not sure why we're wanting to even dip our toes into that. Not my monkey, not my circus. Please keep us out of this.
Brooks, any final thoughts before we go?
Yeah. The thing you can do is vote in support for Kamala Harris. She may not change her policy. It doesn't matter. Her running and being in the position she's in has already destabilized Netanyahu's cabinet significantly. People inside of it have already been talking about how if this goes wrong, what are we going to do? They weren't doing that prior to her running because they thought they had a Biden or Trump. And then Biden, what the fuck? He's not going to do anything. Just that is enough to destabilize. Support her and allow someone to put pressure properly on Israel to go to a one-state solution where everyone there has the rights of a citizen, where everyone there is treated equal. Like we've been saying they are, a democracy, not a lie, as an ethno-state. And that's what we should be doing.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't think I have much to add that hasn't already been said. I can't fathom the outrage and anger on either side of this. I can't. And as Lance has mentioned, it goes back a very, very long time. I've seen some criticisms of any peace process and how it gets taken advantage of, and it does. And peaceful systems and trusting, especially longtime enemies, really gets you taken advantage of a lot. But it's still better than fighting, and you get taken advantage of even more in the fighting. So it leads to far greater misery. If you're looking for a perfect life, you're not going to find it. But it's been my experience that the people who try to de-escalate and make things better for everybody are the ones that A, I enjoy spending more time with, and B, have throughout history created what Martin Luther King Jr. called the long, slow arc of history that bends towards justice. It's been people who've been willing to make those sacrifices, and it's never easy, and it always sucks, but it really is better than the alternative. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the mods. Thank you for the super chat that we had earlier and for the becoming a member. And if you like the stream, please let people know and share it. You can join us on the Discord, find out about our other shows and when else we'll be on. And our next show is Downtime with Xandering on. And if you'd like to join us again, if you're free, Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, I think, Downtime. So look forward to that, and we will see you guys on the Discord or on Thursday. Have a good night all.